Akua, glad to have you on the show today.
Really excited to be here, CFA. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Awesome. Let's start by getting your view on how you think COVID-19 has changed technology and startups in Africa.
Yeah, really great sort of question. From my perspective, I think that COVID has had a really interesting impact in that it showed us what has worked and what maybe isn't working as well. I had the privilege of working actually on a consulting project where we were focused on looking at tech-enabled businesses, especially delivery-based businesses, to really see the impact that COVID had. And so when you're looking at some of the e-commerce sites or some of the sites that are a little bit more focused on delivering goods and providing goods in that way, I think that it actually was quite a positive, I guess you can say, a bit of a pro for those types of businesses that actually had, a system that worked online, some level of logistics that also worked. But I think the key here was making sure whether or not they knew they had inventory. So those businesses that didn't maybe have complete control over their inventory, it was probably a lot harder for them to get in touch with merchants and get in touch with vendors, because a lot of vendors and merchants weren't necessarily opening. So I think in some ways, it really highlighted how businesses who were really solving a real problem around delivery and logistics were able to really capitalize that and use that moving forward. Businesses maybe that hadn't figured it out as well, maybe things didn't necessarily work out as well for them. And then of course, businesses that were a bit more brick and mortar, it was a little bit harder for them as well. So I think COVID really just highlighted a lot of really interesting issues. And when we are thinking about, especially tech-enabled businesses on the continent, a lot of it has to be, what's the right way to put it? We also have to think about behavior change, right? So using a lot of these apps, using a lot of these online platforms is a new thing. So your behavior has to change, or something has to change your behavior. And so COVID definitely changed some people's behavior. It forced people who were willing to maybe jump into their car to go to a pharmacy or to order ahead and maybe go and pick up, to really think about delivery and using delivery, I think, a lot more. So in that way, I think businesses or startups that were looking at that particular sector did really well.
Interesting. Let's sort of understand how your journey into the world of tech began. Take us through that.
Yeah, so it honestly was complete random happen chance. I never thought I would work in tech. I actually never really thought I'd work in leadership or management. Even what I do full time right now was never something I ever envisioned or dreamed. I was honestly randomly recruited by someone who was recruiting for this, not just Pan-African, I mean, a worldwide company that pretty much puts out these clones of websites. And I thought he was crazy, but I couldn't find another opportunity at the time. So I had moved back to Accra, Ghana at this point. So this is 2012. And so I met this recruiter. I thought he was crazy, but it was the best opportunity that came my way. And so I took it. And so that was really the opportunity that gave me, I guess, a lot of exposure to the online business space and how manual actually the online business space really was. So my first real job was, launching and running a real estate classifieds business in Accra, Ghana. And I honestly had no business doing that. My background actually is in land use and environmental planning, which is not real estate, but the recruiter thought it was close enough. I think he really liked sort of my energy and thought that I'd be a pretty good salesperson. I am a pretty good salesperson, but probably not in a market where being humble and being quiet is a little bit more of the norm. So I'm a bit on the excited side doing sales and marketing in Ghana and Accra specifically. But I mean, ultimately, it was a really interesting opportunity. And for me, one of the things I've learned about myself is that I love a challenge. And I thought it was a challenge.
You probably answered my next question, but let me still ask it. So what would you have done differently if you were in a tech company today?
That's a really interesting question. And to be honest, I don't think there's much I could have done differently. I think that one of the reasons why I was able to, not always, I would say willingly, but one of the reasons why I think I was able to influence and sometimes maybe drag people along was simply because I was so naive. I hadn't really worked within a structured environment prior to that. So my experience prior to that was working for USAID projects. So to the development space, which is very different from working within the tech-enabled space or even more corporate space. So I was, completely green. I was very naive. And so I was just doing what I thought was best. and based on what I could sort of glean from the situation. And I think it's because of that, I really focused on trying to build rapport with my team. I really focused on, what worked for me as opposed to trying to fit myself into boxes or to do things that didn't really resonate. So for example, even though anyone looking at my name is obviously incredibly Ghanaian, I don't sound necessarily very Ghanaian. My approach to many things people would say is probably not stereotypically Ghanaian. And I realized that very early on, that I actually put people off, I annoyed people, and that I wasn't necessarily the best person to do all the sales or the best person to do all the, customer service. So I quickly made sure that I brought people onto my team that, one, spoke different local languages, two, maybe spoke at a pace that was very different from me. And then of course, three, probably had a better understanding of the market than I did.
All right, Akua, we're running out of time, and I have a couple of more questions to ask you. First one, I can imagine that you are very conscious about your productivity, and a lot of employers today, complain that, even with all the technology, people are becoming less productive, right? What's your take on how people can be more productive with all the tools available today?
Being in an office for 8 hours a day doesn't equate 8 hours of productive work or 8 hours of work that's going to positively impact your bottom line.
Very quickly, even though we're focused on, startup founders, tech startups, I just want to get your take quickly on social media pressure and its effect on especially young people today. What's the way forward?
Yeah, and I think social media pressures also, I think, impact founders, CEOs as well. And I think, there's one end where being able to access people in this way, I think is amazing, right? You can kind of ask anyone for advice or be mentored kind of by anyone and really see what other people are up to. But I think a key thing for us also to recognize is that social media is incredibly curated. We're not showing people everything. And so we're only seeing typically the best parts of it or what people want us to see. And I think it's also really important that even a lot of CEOs and founders, even in the tech space, and I think this is across the world, are also leveraging that, right, to show a certain face, to show themselves in a certain light, because it might help them with getting additional funding. It might support their business in other ways and even allow them, right, to get recognition in media, all those things. So, I think social media is being used in a really unique way. I think that for the most part, it can be positive, but really just recognizing that you shouldn't try to compare yourself to what someone else is doing. That's the first thing. And then also really recognizing that a lot of what you're seeing really has a specific intention. And that intention is usually to help push the bottom line of whatever business, especially these founders or CEOs have. So there typically is a lot of thought that goes into a lot of what's being shared. And I'm sure a lot of people will be like, no, there's not much thought. Also recognizing that a lot of our decision-making is subconscious. So even if we're not necessarily aware of it, there probably is an intention there, but maybe we have to just spend some time and a little bit of energy reflecting on it and really trying to see how we're coming across and maybe what we're communicating to the world.
Amazing, Akua. Finally, we're out of time. What are some of the tools you can recommend that you use out there that startup founders, executives can make use of as well?
So the first thing I would say is really take some time to know yourself and recognize that you're going to evolve. Where you were 5 years ago, even where you were a year ago, is not going to be the same to where you are now. So taking a bit of time and a bit of space to really reflect on what success could look like for you, I think can be incredibly helpful. I have a ton of resources on my website. I have a blog, there's just so much stuff, I've put out there. And I think that you can just Google. And I think this one resource, and I mentioned it on a recent podcast, but looking at something like a Wheel of Life, so you can Google it, I think can be incredibly helpful and help you really see that maybe a year ago you really wanted to focus on your business, but there's something else that maybe is more important to you right now. So just taking the time to reflect on where you are, rate those different pieces will really help you think about, what do I need to do as a human being so I can show up as a leader?
Akua, thank you so much for being on the show today. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.